It is generally believed that true scientists are convinced atheists, because they have a deep understanding of the essence of the processes occurring in the world around us. Therefore, it is quite funny when scientists in the field of astrophysics in their reasoning are based on a theory that is like two drops of water, similar to the biblical stories about the creation of the world. Yes, I am talking about the Big Bang Theory, as a result of which, allegedly, the universe arose. Of course, the description of the creation of the world, set forth in the first book of the Old Testament of the Bible verbatim, does not resemble the theory created in the mid-20s of the last century by a Belgian priest, Georges Lemaîtr. One must pay tribute to this man, whose inquisitive mind was hungry for new knowledge. In addition to Jesuit college, Georges studied at the Catholic University of Leuven, majoring in engineering. However, during World War I, he was mobilized into the army and had to interrupt his studies. After the war, he returned to the university to continue his education, where he began to study mathematics, physics, astronomy and theology. The presence of theology in the list of scientific disciplines is not accidental. Let us not forget that Georges studied at a Catholic university. It was theology, in other words, the systematic presentation and interpretation of religious dogmas, that would later play a prominent role in the emergence of the Big Bang Theory. After graduating as an abbot, Lemaîtr went to continue his education at Cambridge University, where, as a research student, he did a number of works on cosmology, stellar astronomy, and the theory of numerical methods for solving typical mathematical problems. Lemaîtr then moved to the United States, where he worked at the Harvard Observatory and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he earned his Ph.D. degree. In 1925, our abbot returned back to Belgium to his native Catholic university, where he became a professor of astrophysics and then of applied mathematics. It is not for nothing that I have devoted so much time to describing the trajectory of Georges Lemaîtr's education. In the mind of this undoubtedly talented young man, the scientific discoveries of the time and the worldview of a Catholic priest were intricately intertwined. In the mid-20s of the last century, Lemaîtr, independently of the works of Alexander Friedmann, created his theory of the expanding universe, in which he was able to mathematically deduce a number of regularities, later confirmed by observations, in particular the relationship between the distance and speed of galaxies, now known as the Hubble constant. Here it is worth making a small digression and remembering Alexander Friedmann and why his similar theory, created a few years before Lemaîtr's theory, was practically forgotten in world scientific circles. Friedmann lived in Petersburg and worked in mathematics, physics, geophysics and cosmology. By the way, he was the first in Russia to master the mathematical apparatus of Einstein's theory of gravitation and began to read at the university a course of tensor calculus as an introductory part to the course of the general theory of relativity. Friedmann polemicized with Albert Einstein in the pages of a scientific German physics journal, in which he published his theory. Looking ahead, I will say that Einstein was not at all enamored of this theory. Alexander Friedmann died of typhoid fever in 1925 and his theory was almost forgotten. I do not know whether Georges Lemaîtr was familiar with Friedmann's works. Theoretically it could be so, because the works were published in an authoritative international scientific journal. And the figure of Einstein in the mid-20s years of the last century was already significant, and his publications, and even more critical statements, did not go unnoticed not only for scientific circles, but also for the general public. To find out the degree of Georges Lemaîtr's awareness of Alexander Friedmann's works is not possible today. In scientific circles it is believed that they came to the same conclusions independently of each other. Well, this happens many times. Both Friedmann and Lemaîtr, who published his work in 1927, came to the same conclusions with the help of mathematical calculations within the framework of Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity. and both times the great physicist was forced to agree with their mathematical models, although he did not accept their conclusions about the origin and future fate of the universe. According to eyewitnesses, at the first personal meeting between Einstein and Lemaîtr at one of the scientific congresses in 1927, Einstein said literally the following: "Your calculations are correct, but your understanding of physics is abominable." As it is known, in Einstein's theory there is a coefficient that makes a correction for the stability of the universe. In the works of Friedmann and Lemaîtr this coefficient is absent, and in the results of their calculations there is only one difference from Einstein's works: the universe is expanding. But there are differences in the theories of these authors. Friedmann, being still a mathematician, not an astrophysicist, showed that the universe can not only expand, but also shrink. The basis of his theory was the hypothesis of a pulsating universe. Lemaîtr in his scientific activity was still an astrophysicist, so he settled on the hypothesis of a continuously expanding universe. In this case, both theorists assumed the existence of some point from which the universe arises and then returns to it according to Friedmann's hypothesis, or which, as Lemaîtr said, is the primary atom of the universe. In the modern interpretation of the Big Bang theory, this period of the universe's development is called the singularity point. And here begins the most curious thing. Lemaitr's theory conceptually coincides with the biblical story of the creation of the world, which I already recalled at the beginning of the video. Certainly, the theology of the abbot has clearly distorted his scientific worldview, as Einstein pointed out when commenting on Lemaitr's understanding of the essence of physics. The attentive viewer is bound to ask why the Big Bang theory was universally accepted, even despite the authority of Einstein himself and a number of other physicists. To correctly answer this question, we should remember the principles of the scientific approach. We will not delve into the theory of the scientific method. We will note only one thing: the correctness of this or that hypothesis is confirmed by experiments. In the case of cosmology, the experiment is replaced by repeatedly double-checked observations of this or that phenomenon. That's what happened this time. Just 2 years later, in 1929, the American astrophysicist Edwin Hubble discovered that the redshift in the spectrum of light from distant stars is greater than that of nearby stars, and increases approximately in proportion to the distance. This discovery confirmed the conclusions of Friedmann and Lemaitr's work. But despite this, first decades after this confirmation, quite a few scientists continued to be critical of Lemaitr's hypothesis. For example, Fred Hoyle, a British astrophysicist, one of the developers in 1948 of the hypothesis of a stationary model of the universe, ironically called Lemaitr's hypothesis the Big Bang theory. But his irony in the eyes of Lemaitr's supporters has acquired a different meaning, and this name has become a commonly used name for the whole concept of the expanding universe. You may again ask, but why did Einstein so easily abandon his point of view? To answer this question, it is appropriate to recall the misconception of another scientist who laid the foundations of many areas of modern science. I am talking about Aristotle, certainly one of the greatest minds of humanity. He was genuinely convinced that the sun rotates around the Earth. His geocentric model of the universe was dominant for almost 1,000 and 1,500 years. But does this misconception give us the right to regard Aristotle as a fool who failed to see the now obvious? Of course not. He created his theory on the basis of facts and observations relevant to his time. Given this circumstance, Aristotle's theory is flawless. But centuries went by, new instruments of observation of celestial bodies appeared, which gave new facts for thinking about the structure of the universe. Eventually, the quantity of facts grew into the quality of scientific knowledge, and scientists changed their point of view, moving to the heliocentric model in relation to our solar system. And now, with a high degree of probability, we can speak about the beginning of a new qualitative transition in physical science. A couple of years ago, It seemed that all the puzzles of the picture of the universe were already stacked correctly, except for some details. And so, in order to complete the theoretical justification of the interaction of elementary particles, called the Standard Model, a large collider was built. The unique James Webb Telescope was launched into space to obtain final and decisive evidence of the correctness of the Big Bang theory. However, the scientists who initiated these unique and very expensive scientific projects did not see exactly what they expected. If in the direction of the microcosm of elementary particles simply could not get all the expected results, then in the case of the macrocosm of the scale of the universe, supporters of Lemaitr's theory was a great disappointment. The results of observations from the James Webb Telescope refuted the theoretical conclusions about the age of the universe. One note: the shock among scientists from the new data was so great and so discouraging for them that they were simply confused. But at the same time many began to look for crutches to support the collapsing theory, so comfortable and familiar. Yes, many will say, criticism is the easiest thing to do, but what can we really take as a substitute for the modern scientific view of the universe, in which repeatedly verified facts could sit side by side with newly discovered ones? To answer this question we should recall the ancient Hindu parable of the three blind sages studying the elephant. But I'll talk about that in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and see you soon.